What sort of things were you able to kind of do so far in the drug discovery space?
The key idea is using uh, AI agents powered by language models to automate a lot of the manual work that is involved in early stage drug discovery. So typically, scientists would spend a year, a couple of years, uh, wrangling data, setting up simulations, running simulations, iterating on those in silico experiments just to get some initial results that they can then take to the lab. And we want to drastically shorten that. We want to enable them to get the additional results, much faster than they can. So, all the technology that we're building is essentially geared towards that mission of making drug discovery faster and cheaper.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of What About AI Agents? Today with me we have Javier Tordable, who is the founder of Pauling.AI, and they are pioneering agentic drug discovery. Previously, Javier used to work at Google, and now Microsoft, and now he is bringing his expertise to agentic drug discovery, an MIT grad. So, Javier, I'll let you introduce yourself, and I'm really excited to hear what you're working on and building.
Thank you so much, Philippe, and thank you for having me here. Yeah, I'd love to tell you a little bit more about what I'm working on. I spent many years working in big tech and doing all sorts of different things, working as part of a lot of different teams. And at one point, I realized that there was this tremendous opportunity using the technology that we were building for, I would say, very worthwhile, very important mission, which is help scientists and physicians and doctors and biotech leaders find novel drugs. I thought that was a, a significant mission that was important for the world. So I left my role. I was working as a director at Google at the time, and I decided to found a company. And now we're focusing entirely on. I'm focusing entirely on drug discovery, and the key idea is using uh, AI agents powered by language models to automate a lot of the manual work that is involved in early stage drug discovery. So typically, scientists would spend a year, a couple of years, uh, wrangling data, setting up simulations, running simulations, iterating on those in silico experiments just to get some initial results that they can then take to the lab. And we want to drastically shorten that. We want to enable them to get the additional results, much faster than they can. So, all the technology that we're building is essentially geared towards that mission of making drug discovery faster and cheaper. Which of course will have, we're hoping that will have an impact on not just on our customers, but also on the world as a whole.
And how would, for example, like FDA approvals work for LLM discovered drugs or medicines? So how would that comply with the current regulation?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So any I would say there are different stages of approval, right? So any drug that somebody may want to give to a human has to go through a certain process where the company checks, typically on animal experiments, but also a variety of other methods, and then they get what's called an IND, an investigational new drug approval. And then they are allowed to run clinical trials, which means giving that drug to patients in a clinic. So typically, clinical trials are done in multiple stages. First starting with healthy volunteers, and eventually with patients for that specific disease, right? So after the clinical trials is when a drug gets, basically NDA approval, which is new drug, something I don't know what the acronym stands for. And after that is when somebody is allowed to sell that drug. Or a doctor is allowed to prescribe that drug. So all that process must happen before anybody can take a new molecule, a new drug, at least in the United States. So whether the drug was found using AI methods, or it was entirely engineered by a language model, or it was hallucinated by the model or whatnot, the process is exactly the same. So the language model may come up with a molecule, but you still need to do the experiments that allow you to get that IND approval, and then you need to do the clinical trials. And only after all that stuff happens, then somebody can take that drug. So it is. Uh, it is not necessarily a difference, the fact that the drug was obtained using a language model, than if it was, imagined by a medicinal chemist, for example. The process is essentially the same. The main difference is that when you do all these tasks manually, they may take many, many years, whereas when you use technology, you may get to the same endpoint, but much faster and cheaper, hopefully.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, what sort of things were you able to kind of do so far in the drug discovery space? Were you able to discover anything? How are because I know LMs they hallucinate a lot, but they can also come up with brilliant solutions that we are not even thinking about. So, what has been your experience with it so far, and what are the things that you are building to accelerate that experience? Because
So we're still fairly young. As a matter of fact, nobody yet has been able to get a drug approved, a drug that was created integrally with the help of AI approved. I think the most advanced one is a phase two drug by silico medicine. I think they're probably close to starting that phase three, and will probably be a few years before the drug gets approved. And they started doing this like 4 or 5 years ago. So it is a very slow process, unfortunately, which is why we want to make it faster. But I would say, maybe to the core of your question, there are some things that AI models or language models in particular are very good at. One of them is reviewing prior research, prior literature. So the language models are really good at reading, thousands of different papers and books and so on, and summarizing that. Typically, when somebody begins a new program, they would spend some time going through research, figuring out what's important, what's not important, kind of getting a feel for the field for that specific area, and that process would take weeks of work, if not months. So language models make that drastically faster. Then on our side, we have been able to automate a lot of the initial experiments, meaning there's a process called docking, basically, which may not mean much to anybody outside of drug discovery, but it's essentially a process by which somebody takes a structure of a target protein, protein that may be involved in a disease, and then tries to find small molecules or other therapeutic molecules that fit inside of a crevice inside of that structure. So setting up and running those simulations typically takes a little bit of time, and the simulations themselves take time because they are very computationally intensive. Most people do that, in workstations in the lab. So the process may take, weeks. We have been able to automate that entire process end to end, and we run our own docking workflow in the cloud, and high performance machines with GPUs, hundreds or thousands of them, so that the entire process from somebody coming in and saying, this is a protein that I want to inhibit, to having real molecules that they can start testing, we've shortened that drastically from a few weeks to a day, less than a day. Now, the next step is to validate some of those things using higher uh, accuracy simulation methods, molecular dynamics and other methods. And we're still working on that. We're, I would say, quite advanced. And once we get that, we will have a very sophisticated, workflow to take any protein target and then find an inhibitor, which is the case of most new drugs. Find an inhibitor that binds to that target. So essentially within a matter of a couple of days.
well, that's groundbreaking. So that really cuts down the drug discovery process. And you're doing that just for one small niche of that's protein inhibitors, basically. Is that correct?
Well, it's not a small niche. I would say it's 90, 95%. Yeah. Yeah, most drugs are like that, right? So if like this, something that was interesting to me as well as I was starting in the field. But when you think about the categories of therapeutic drugs, right, or medicines that the doctors prescribe, most of them are inhibitors because that's the thing that traditionally we've been able to evaluate and to understand properly, right? So, maybe the easiest one to understand is an antibiotic, right? An antibiotic is basically a molecule that prevents the bacteria from working well, and hopefully doesn't, prevent, the host, right, or the human that has that bacteria from, you know, from working well. But a lot of drugs for cancer, for example, are molecules that prevent, the cancer cells from proliferating. A lot of drugs for uh, you know, uh, you know, psychiatric disorders, are molecules that kind of, prevent the brain from doing certain things, like maybe it's working, too fast, or, like neuronal spikes are too high or whatever, right? So a lot of the things that we do in drug discovery are find molecules that kind of prevent something from working. Now, of course, today there are a lot of other, novel, therapies, cell therapies, for example, for some cancers, and so on and so forth. But I mean, if I remember correctly from the top of my head, I would imagine, 80-90% of all drugs are inhibitors, what's called inhibitor, right? And and about 60 or 70% of all drugs are small molecules. So, like there are other ways to kind of eliminate, something from the body or prevent it from working well, using antibodies and other things. A lot of the most popular drugs today are basically antibodies that do the same thing, right? Like they, for the, let's say, autoimmune disorders. Like many times people would get all these autoimmune disorders, Crohn's disease, which is, anyway, without getting into the details of the disease, right? But you have like certain, substances that the body generates that then, trigger other reactions inside of the body. So one possible therapy is to inject an antibody that captures this little signaling molecule that the body generates, and that prevents the side effects, right? So, if you have anybody that, or if you know anybody that has had an autoimmune disease, for example, many of the therapies are essentially antibodies that kind of prevent, some of the molecules in this step.
I stand corrected. And so, in polling AI is basically automating the process of generation of all of the research and generation of the documentation needing to run the experiments. Is that is that a good understanding of what the actual product does?
Yes, and we run the experiments as well, of course, inside of the I would say the simulations, right? We call it experiments, but they are simulations inside of the computer, right? They are in silico experiments, as opposed to the experiments on the wet lab. Um, so uh, there are some other folks that are working on automating labs to do physical experiments. I think that area is super interesting, and there's going to be a lot of interesting research and interesting products coming from that. But for us, we're focusing only on that first in silico stage, which honestly, it's, I would say, my understanding is that in general it takes longer than the experimental phase. A lot of experiments can be done relatively quickly if you know what to look for.
Insights that you've learned working in this process with agents, and how what's some of the challenges that you faced optimizing agents to do this type of work?
There's so many things, right? I mean, like any other product, I think, or any other, foundational technology, I think agents take a little bit to master, and we're still, not quite there yet. There is, at least in drug discovery, there is a risk of hallucinations, right? That is very significant. In other areas, maybe a little bit less, right? Like if you're creating a marketing campaign, maybe it doesn't matter that much, right? That the agent is kind of, coming up with crazy ideas. But in drug discovery, um, you need to have a solid grounding, right? So if an agent is making a conclusion based on a research paper, it needs to understand the research paper, and needs to, extract information, in a reliable way, and then it needs to make a conclusion, that leverages that information, right? Like you cannot just, hallucinate things. That kind of, defeats the purpose. I would say we've learned that evals are important. When we started working on this, we did not have the right evaluation metrics and processes, and the agent would switch, what it was coming up with from one day to the next. So that was a little bit frustrating. And we're definitely far from perfect. There's a lot of work still to be done, but I think evals are very very important within this space. And then I would say the other thing that has become notorious is that um, the agents, or at least the language models that power the agents, are changing so much, right? So it is important to be able to kind of adapt with that. So when we started, for example, I think we were using one of the Gemini series models. I think it was Gemini 2. um, and there is a very noticeable change in quality between the models that we were using just 1 year ago and the models that we're using today. So if somebody is building an AI agent and they say, well, I'm going to use GPT, GPT-4, for example, and a year from now, there might be a GPT-5 or a GPT-6, right? So it's important to be able to switch things and adjust the prompts to leverage the new capabilities of the models, right? So, it's a little bit different than a lot of other areas in technology, right? Like if you're building a web app today, for example, and you use, Postgres, 17, then chances are next year you don't have to change to Postgres 18 because you get this new amazing capability, right? Like your database is probably going to be steady. Like you can keep that for 5 or 6 years and you will not really notice, that you're missing anything. Whereas here, I think people need to be ready to essentially switch models every few months.
Yeah, that's what we've noticed in our work with agents as well. That depending on the performance of the model, you have to tune the prompts, and you cannot sit still. So that agentic code that you wrote a year ago, it's obsolete. You have to rewrite not the whole thing, but you have to at least adjust the prompts and do fine tuning because the models they change so much, and even the legacy models they don't perform consistently. So there is no consistency, I guess. So how do you deal with this world of no consistency? How did you have some frameworks that you've set up to help yourself transition?
We don't, unfortunately. This is one of the areas where there's still a little bit more work to do. Uh, we basically do some human eval, right, and we're developing our automated eval, but it's just something that we're living with at the moment. I think this is going to be one of the more important areas, in the second half of this year, right, and next year, as people build more and more applications, and they realize that you just can't build the application and then leave it steady, right? Like you have to be ready to migrate, models, every few months, and you need to do that safely.
I guess somebody would have to build like tooling for that, like auto migration tooling or auto optimization tooling that would just switch the models for you, rewrite the prompts to use all the latest techniques, and has proper evals and can test against your evals. So sort of like agent to agent autonomous migration. So you don't have to worry about it because ultimately right now it's a manual process. So in regards to how you're building things at Pauling, right? So you're automating all the steps. Can you talk a little bit about the design of your agents? How did you design them? How do they communicate? Is it a lot of agent to agent, or do you have like? Because I know you mentioned evals, so yeah, of course you need to verify the outputs and then check and then have it redo it until it gets to the until it passes the test. But do you also do lots of agent to agent communication, and do they evaluate each other? Like how autonomous is it, or is it still more like human first agent workflows?
Yeah, in our case, it's still a human driven interaction. But I wouldn't say, or maybe if I can correct, I would say a human initiated interaction, not necessarily driven. Um, we're not using a lot of agent to agent communication, right? If anything, there's sub agents that kind of perform individual tasks, but they don't necessarily coordinate with each other. I think. Um, Multi-agent systems where different agents have different roles and then they evaluate and they check each other, can be very 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 powerful, but they're also much harder to develop, I think. And So in our case, because the workflow is still fairly sequential, and we want it to be understandable, and where a human has a little bit of a degree of control. We're using agents that perform individual steps, and then on occasion, they check with the user for acknowledgement. So the agent performs the work, on a request by a user, but then it checks every once in a while, to make sure that things are moving in the right direction. I think probably over the next 12 months, we will see capabilities in language models that enable fully multi-agentic systems where the agents behave independently. I'm not sure, things are ready for that yet. I think um, hierarchical systems, for example, where one agent uh, decides on a set of tasks and then individual agents perform those tasks, probably work well today. But agents were communicating with each other using a variety of mechanisms, and then review different tasks, reiterate, redo their process. I'm not sure they are ready yet, right, to perform tasks. Like at the end of the day, at least for us, right, like the goal is to um, optimize the time that it takes to complete a certain process, right? So if a user has to retry it multiple times, or it has to tell the agents to go and restart again, that kind of diminishes the effect of the tool.
Yeah, especially like if an agent has to run for an hour and then you come back and it gave you a complete nonsensical output, and then based on that you're like, okay, well, why did I just waste an hour of my time? So it's not exactly versus having it like more controlled or like step by step sequential. You can get the results fast, and then you get more results fast. So it's still human driven, but it's
Yeah,
agentic. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
cool. So what are some of the like I don't know if it's called earned insights or if it's just called like learning something that you can share that's like deep that you're excited about that like this how I use it and then nobody else uses it and this is my secret sauce, not to reveal your proprietary information but your like secrets for using the agents, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean there are so many things, but but I don't know if I don't know which one would be more or less interesting. I think one thing that might be interesting for somebody that is building agents from scratch right now is um, like where I would start, right, is from how a human does the process, right? So having good documentation of how a human is specifically doing things, but then um, kind of feeding that to another LLM, right, and asking it, well, how would you change this, right, like, or how would you optimize that process, and then maybe using that as the basis for the agent. um, in our case, we begin from human derived computational chemistry protocols, right? Like, so we have multiple people that have decades of experience doing drug discovery. They know how to do all the different tasks. um, but then when we create an agent, we give the agent a little bit of flexibility as well, to pick different things, right? So I would say, for somebody that is building an agent in marketing, for example, I see a lot of those. It seems that people are very excited about it. I would say it may be a good idea to begin with how a human actually does it, right? Doing some keyword research and figuring out what are the important keywords, and then creating content and then publishing the content and so on and so forth. I think all that stuff is fine. um, but then maybe feeding that recursively to the agent and asking, if my goal is X, how would you change this process in order to get that faster? I think that is it's interesting, right? Like people are not kind of leveraging it as much, right? But you can find nice surprises, right? Like maybe the language model is able to find a better way to use tools, right, to kind of improve the process to make it faster or more reliable.
Yeah, I think recursion is a very powerful tool when it comes to language models building on top of the context until it eventually reaches like consensus. We use two or three models in some of the cases for technical writing, where like we have OpenAI models ask Gemini and then ask Claude, and they would have a debate internally in a recursive way until they produce an output. It's an interesting output, but sometimes it's just nonsense. I'm not gonna say it's a magical thing that does it works amazing, but sometimes you are surprised at how they reach a consensus and they release to you something that is valuable. I would say. I would say to your point, recursion is something I'm very much I think underused because it can give you a very high bill at the end of the day if you are paying for your own API usage. I guess.
Yeah, yeah, but an interesting thought, right, is um, many times we as humans we start writing our prompts and then we realize that it takes a lot of work, right, and maybe we don't do as complete of a job as we would like, right. So people would write zero shot prompts, for example, instead of doing few shot prompts, even though we know that giving the model a few examples would do a good result, right. So using the model to write its own prompt, for example, I think is a very interesting idea, right, like maybe with some human refinement or whatnot. But it can make a difference between saying, well, give me this, right? Or like, give me this. This is the output that I'm expecting. Here are a few examples, right? Like, that it's going to take half an hour to write that thing in detail, right? And so, like, many times you just end up not doing it. But if you can get the model to do that and you spend, 5 minutes of work, right? I think that may make a significant difference.
Yeah, upscaling your prompts with using the models. I think I was talking to somebody recently, and they basically said, "Yeah, like we don't do those. Like they have those JSON video prompts these days that are that they throw it into video and it gives you like a good video, and nobody writes them, right? So they just they tell it to Claude or they tell it to Grok, just forgive me that video prompt, and gives it, and they throw it, and they get a nice looking video because nobody's gonna spend all this time writing those super complicated JSON style prompts. Do you use JSON style prompts at all, or are they more like plain text? No, I never got an answer. Yeah,
Yeah, we don't use JSON as well. I think it's Yeah, I mean, in our case, I don't think it's as useful as natural language. We use JSON internally for tool usage, right? But we don't use it for like the overall prompt.
yeah. I don't know if it's valuable at all, but some people seem to be it looks good on social media when they say, "Oh, I use a JSON style prompt." And, oh, you must be very smart. There you go. But yeah, yeah.
I guess like for some of the things that they are trying to do for image models, for example, maybe the JSON style prompt works better because sometimes, I mean, for the image generation, I imagine it's harder to go through all those details, right? Saying like, here's what I want in every section of the image, and here's the style, and so on and so forth. And it's hard to even remember, how to spell all that out, right? So I can see the use for JSON style prompts over there. But in general text generation tasks, I'm not sure. I haven't seen good proof that it's any better.
Yeah, I guess to your point, like if you think about the configurations of a camera, like a Canon or Nikon camera, there's like 10 million different configurations. So you put it in in a JSON, so it knows that that's the level of image detail it has to produce. Then it knows, and it kind of mirrors that style. Yeah. To your point, that makes sense. So it's really something that really requires a multitude of dimensions of specification. Then it could have value, but I guess in clinical research. So are you using lots of deep research? Is that a big part of your model where it runs multiple researches in parallel, pulls all these relevant articles together, then it analyzes all of them, builds like a context around it, throws it into a vector database, and then pulls the stuff? Or do you not use vector databases? Because I know in context prompts work better, and vector
Hmm.
is like 50-50. So
Yeah. So we are using somebody else's, deep research models actually. So what our agent does is that kind of second phase. So for literature research, we're using other people's models right now. Then we take the results of that, and then what our agent does is it goes from that, target idea to a small molecule generation for that target. So um, uh, but to answer your question, right? I would say um, in my mind, it's not conclusive yet, right? Like I think as context lengths have become larger and larger, um, you could say, a lot of RAG systems, they kind of, diminish a little bit in value. They were not perfect to begin with, right? Because you lose so much detail, right? When you start, chunking and extracting, embeddings and so on and so forth. And then retrieval was not great. And you had a lot more complexity, right? That is also, harder to eval. You know, in my mind, if we can extend context length, that is probably more useful. If anything, I would say there could be an information retrieval, kind of, first phase where you get the relevant papers or the relevant books. Then you feed everything inside of that context, right, to the model, and then you make that conclusion, right? I would say that that approach probably works better than using a pure RAG system.
Yeah, I also feel like the value of RAG is fairly diminished for me. I've tried using RAG for different systems and it's so inconsistent. And context windows are bigger now, so we can throw a lot of things. There was somebody who was building something. I was talking to them recently where they are really good at summarizing the context to put into the context window, so they are able to extract as much value out of the current context window as they have, which produces noticeably consistent and good outputs from from models. So I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, yeah, and you can also, I guess, structure your queries, just different parts of the context at different points, right? So like in the context of research, one of the things that I like to do is tell the model, here's, one paper, right? Or a set of papers, with one specific perspective. Read everything and then give an opinion on whether this is a solid idea or not. And then you feed it another set of papers from a different perspective and ask the model again, passing everything in context. Is this idea consistent with this other set of papers? And then you can contrast those two, right? So you don't have to, I would say, feed everything to the model at the same time.
Yeah, to your point, where you don't want to do one shot prompts, you want to take smaller chunks and building upon building and building and building, and that gives you a consistently good output because it's a very controlled and it's a very thorough and premediated output versus just throw everything into context and pray and spray model, right?
And many times, of course, the context would have contradictions as well, right? That's another problem, right? But the good thing is, like, these things have become so cheap, right? That if you say, well, I want to do 15 different requests, instead of one, right? Then I pass all these large context windows or whatever, you're still spending like dollars, right? And I think prices today are like what, like 10, 15 cents, per million tokens, something like that, right? I mean, it's it's almost nothing, right? When you're working in a very very important scientific research problem. Like if I was trying to do something where I don't know, there's maybe less potential economic value, right? Like I would be a little bit more cautious about it. But for significant problems, I think this language models are just so cheap that it doesn't even matter anymore, right? Being super efficient with requests.
Yeah, I mean, especially if it's in a medical field where you literally have like the payback is huge. So how do medical companies, do they partner with you? Are you working with like some existing I don't know, I don't know if you have NDAs or whatever, but are you working with some existing medical kind of corporations for this research? Are they funding it, or how does your like economics work? Just curious.
Yeah. So the we have a few early stage partners. We're looking for more. And the way that we partner with them is, in a way, sharing the risk of the drug discovery project, right? So there are a lot of organizations that work as what's called contract research organizations, or CROs. So somebody comes in, pays some money and says, give me, do this experiment for me. And I think that's fine, but we're trying to shed a little bit of the risk process, right? By essentially partnering with them, and then maybe they pay less, or they don't pay upfront, and then we kind of keep a little bit of the upside, in the case that we find a molecule that is useful, right? So the way that we want to work with different biotechs or scientists is kind of joining forces together, where we may use our agents, our in silico capabilities with our experimental capabilities, with the goal of actually finding a useful molecule, and then we can both benefit, right, as that molecule becomes valuable and is licensed, or hopefully eventually some of this get approve these drugs, right? And then once they become approved drugs, right? Like there's essentially cash flows and royalties and so on and so forth that go to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully FDA soon adopts agents for drug approvals so they don't take 5 years to approve a new drug. So that
Yeah.
would that would be awesome.
There's lots of need, I think, in the clinical trial space and reviewing documentation and creating documentation. Right, a lot of that stuff is very, very, very time intensive. Honestly, it's even worse on the pharma company, right? Compiling all the documentation together, making sure that is 100% precise, right? That there's not any data manipulation anywhere, right? I think that process typically takes many months. For the pharma company, right? Which in principle has everything under their control, right? They have all the data everywhere, right? But just compiling and checking that documentation is a very, very intensive process.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's so much room for improvements there, and hopefully, over the next 5 years, with all these investments in AI that we are seeing, we're going to see drugs shipping to market within 6 months upon discovery after passing all the tests, and that would obviously be like so beneficial for people to be able to get access to that. So I'm really really excited about your mission at Pauling because I think that's a big part of a drug discovery and being able to help other people and cure things faster.
What I always tell folks like in my company or people that I know that are interested in the space is um, it's very hard to make money in drug discovery. This is not a field for getting rich quick, for sure, right? Especially today, right, where there are so many opportunities everywhere. But the really important stuff is um, the mission is finding those medicines and then helping people live better lives, and unfortunately there's no other way to do it, right? Like you can make the best marketing agents and make lots of money and then go and move to Bali and buy yourself Lamborghini, right? Like all that stuff is fun, but at the end of the day, like somebody gets some disease, right? Or you go through something, or like you age and you develop Alzheimer's or whatever, right? And then all the money, all those things are not going to be as meaningful for you as having more years of life to spend with the people you love, right? So I think the mission that folks within the life sciences have is so much more important and meaningful, right? Unfortunately we just have to go through this multi-year $100 million process, right? And maybe some of us will be able to make it more efficient, but this is an important fight, right? Then and so you kind of have to be ready to go through.
It's an important mission. I think helps you wake up in the morning and feel good about what you're doing and making the world a better place. Because sometimes you're building this SaaS, and it's just and you're thinking, how can I make this world better? Am I just wasting my years away building a SaaS when I could be actually making a difference in people's lives, curing diseases, and doing that type of work? So yeah, my to the top of the head to you, my friend. This is really, really, really powerful stuff that you're building.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hope more people join into this field. I wish maybe somebody is listening to this and thinking about, well, what should I do next? Maybe you can start looking at drug discovery as a potential interesting idea, right? I think that would be fantastic.
And if some drug company executive listens to us and thinks this is valuable, how do they get in touch with you? How do they partner with you?
Yeah, so it's easy to find. It's Pauling.AI. That's our website, and then my email is Javier at Pauling.AI, or LinkedIn, Twitter, any of those platforms work. So if anybody is kind of interested in these ideas or thinking about how to use some of this technology for their own drug discovery, I'd love to talk with them and see if we can work together.
Excellent. Well, everyone, this was Javier Tordable from Polling AI. Very insightful conversation about structuring agentic prompts and drug discovery. Thank you so much for joining. I'd love to have you back sometime to hear what you built and if we ever reach agent to agent, how we get to singularity with drug discovery. But, anyways, my point to you is yeah, thank you so much for joining. I really had a good conversation, really enjoyed.
Thank you so much, Philip. It was my pleasure.